minutes. We definitely don't want to talk at you during this meeting. We want to hear from you, but we think it's really important for folks to have the full set of context and information. And so we want to sort of open with that. The presentation will be a very short summary of the engagement findings, a bit on the scenarios that were shared with the task force in a memo earlier in the process, but really focusing on the planning process. So focusing on the container and flex terminal, spine and transportation, the open space, resiliency and infrastructure, and then the mixed use districts. After that opening presentation, we'll move to a Q&A. We'll have around half an hour or so for that. But then the majority of the meeting will have 55 minutes where advisory group members will go into groups with other advisory group members so they can hear and discuss with one another. And then we'll sort of end with a share out at the end and bring everyone back together. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Mike Stamatis from the Red Hook Container Terminal just to share some opening remarks to sort of set the frame for today's meeting.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, everybody. I hope you can all hear me okay. So I was asked to provide some opening remarks tonight. And for many of you that know me, for as long as I've run the port since 2011, it's really been a fight for survival in terms of keeping the port open, fighting the Port Authority and others who didn't care about it, didn't want to hear about why we need a port in Brooklyn. So for the last 6, 7, 8 months that we've been engaged in this process with New York City, EDC, and others, it's really been a breath of fresh air in terms of their willingness to invest and start thinking about the long-term future of the Red Hook Container Terminal, the Brooklyn Marine Terminal at large. I'm the chair of an advisory group representing port tenants, and that mainly includes Red Hook Container Terminal, Manhattan Beer, Vane Brothers, D&M Lumber, and the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal. So all of us have been following this process, trying to provide feedback and input, because all of us really, for the last, for me, 13 years, but Frank Augusta, who is not on here, I don't believe, but Frank would tell you that it's been a fight for probably 40 years that he's been around working at the Brooklyn waterfront, and his predecessor, Lou Pernice, longer, right? So for so many decades, it's been a level of uncertainty. You know, our employees who work at the terminal always wondering if their jobs are going to go away and what their future may be. So you can imagine when New York City EDC come along and say, we care about the port, we want to invest in it, modernize it, and make sure it remains viable for the future. Frank, myself, our employees, all of our partner tenants, the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, we all met that with certainly a welcome enthusiasm and hope that there was going to be a future of certainty. So I really want to thank all of the task force members, the members of the community, stakeholders that have given their time and expertise to this process as we continue to evolve what will ultimately be the plan that gets finally presented for approval at the task force level in about a month. I just want to really underscore the importance of coming to a resolution on this and understanding and appreciating all of the community's involvement and input. There's really, I've always said about the community here in Red Hook, and I'll include Sunset Park when we were working on our South Brooklyn Marine Terminal project. The community engagement here is like I've never seen before. I grew up in New Jersey, and it's just nothing, you know, you don't see anything like the kind of engagement here. So it's really remarkable, and I thank everyone who's always supported the port, the terminal, allowing us to serve the community, serve the city, provide great local jobs, well-paying jobs, family-sustaining jobs, and being part of the fabric of the Red Hook community. So I thank all of you. I'm looking forward to a good outcome. I think ultimately we're gonna get where we need to be. That provides certainty for the port and new benefits for the community. And I'm looking forward to that resolution. So I really just wanted to say thanks to all of you for engaging in this process And I do recognize that at the end of the day, whatever the final plan may be, there may be things in there that certainly don't make everybody happy. There may be things in there that everybody doesn't like, or some people do like, and others don't, including myself and our port partners. But after decades of complete and total neglect on the part of the Port Authority, it is a breath of fresh air that the city is willing to make these long-term commitments. They're already making substantial investments like the new crane that is being ordered and other improvements to the site. So I thank the city as well and EDC for engaging in this process. I'm looking forward to the final outcome. But really just want to thank everyone for their involvement and their support. Chris, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate it. Go to the next slide. So for today's meeting, we really just want to recap sort of what we've heard, some of the key findings from all the engagement that's been conducted to date, review and really focus on some of the site systems and the potential benefits that they bring. Again, provide an opportunity for AG members to share feedback with one another and then report that out, and critically really answer any questions that you all may have on the planning and engagement process. Next slide. Yeah, so just quickly to recap, to date, we've had quite a bit of engagement over the last several months. I think I'll hone in on January, where we had 19 two-hour sessions as part of Public Workshop 3, and met with 177 participants utilizing the site planning tool. Throughout the entire process, we've been tabling at various community events, including NYCHA Family Day and Atlantic Annex. We've hosted feedback sessions, both at BMT and at the Red Hook Art Project. We've been collaborated with Red Hook East and West and conducted drop-in sessions. We've had site tours. We also had a separate site tour. We actually brought Red Hook Houses residents, both East and West, on a tour of the site, and then came back to Red Hook Houses for a listening session. We've had a session with Carroll Gardens Association focused on small businesses in the area. And we're currently collaborating with Red Hook Initiative on a set of focus groups, and those are targeting Cantonese and Mandarin speakers, Spanish speakers, and tomorrow we have a session with NYCHA Youth. We've had 11 advisory group meetings, 6 advisory and joint task force meetings, 8 task force meetings overall. And as you can see at the bottom, we've got a few more engagements upcoming as well, including Public Workshop 4 on Monday. So lots of engagement conducted and some still to come. I want to touch just very quickly on some of the top line and emerging themes that we've heard. So we've heard strong support for modern and sustainable port and container operations, a real strong interest in blue highways and thinking about ways to get trucks off of roads and move cargo via the waterways, but definitely folks want to hear and see more information on the financial feasibility of different revenue generating uses on the site, with some particular questions around maritime operations alone could support and sustain the site. A real desire to retain and enhance light industrial flex spaces, some concern on the potential environmental impacts of nearby residents when thinking about industrial uses, but also a real desire to sort of preserve Red Hook's character. So thinking about the southern end of the site as a space for light industrial uses in the area. Something that came up quite a bit out of our planning sessions was this interest in transforming Atlantic Basin into some sort of cultural or commercial or creative hub that really expands access to the waterfront, with some particular notes around the potential for arts and culture and other community supporting amenities at that site. In particular, in some of our conversations with NYCHA residents, there was a real support for thinking about the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal as some sort of multi-purpose hospitality or entertainment hub that again could be complemented by cultural and civic land uses. And how could this site really become a place that supports local community priorities for existing residents? Also thinking about additional strategies for alleviating, traffic issue on call days, and a real desire to want to see alternative transportation methods for cruise passengers outside of vehicular traffic and cars. Definitely strong interest in workforce training and career pipelines, particularly in connection to the maritime and industrial uses on the site, and a lot of conversation and support for local hiring and workforce training, in particular focused on local neighborhood and local residents. Next slide. As it relates to housing, I think folks definitely recognize that we're in a housing crisis and that BMT, it's appropriate to think about the potential for housing on the BMT site, but within that context, a real focus on the contextual development and some real concerns around tall towers and high density sort of luxury development. Um, and there was also a concern that the housing unit that was sort of presented was just unrealistic given some of the physical constraints of the site, in particular that proximity to mobility, a real interest in wanting to see affordable housing, including low and middle income housing, and other innovative models, whether that's senior housing or supportive housing or housing that's related to vocational training or workforce development. And something that's come up in a few different contexts is this idea of support for a sort of complete modernization of red hook houses, and that particularly came up in the NYCHA AG. There's a desire clearly for additional options as it relates to public transit. So thinking about potential for bus rapid transit, increased ferry service. This is something we've heard loud and clear, I think, from the beginning of this process, just real significant concerns around transportation and mobility, sort of given the existing traffic challenges that are there today. And just real support and wanting a desire to see more thinking around sort of connectivity overall throughout the site into the surrounding neighborhoods. An emphasis on multimodal delivery, micromobility, and last mile delivery, and excitement around the potential for some sort of spine to get trucks off of neighborhood streets and to reduce truck traffic. Definitely some concern around how any of that might increase or form new, or how the new development may increase traffic at the site. And general support for improving bike lanes and pedestrian connections. Lastly, I think this came up, especially in our site planning exercises, but a real desire to think about the north and south ends as sites for larger destination parks that are connected by a greenway, north and south, but also connections and increasing porosity, east and west, to the surrounding neighborhoods. And then lastly, just clear support for resiliency and protection against threats of climate change, but lots of questions and folks wanting to see more information around the sort of specific standards that this project would be designed to. And really just sort of more general concern and wanting a better understanding of how this site can support housing given its location within the flood zone. And then quickly, I'll touch on some of the top lines specifically from the last AGs, the individual AG meetings that where we utilize the site planning tool. But as Mike said, sort of echoing him here, but just a real sort of wanting to highlight the need to support the process and excited about the potential for the port's modernization overall. On the maritime and industrial local business and workforce, they really stress the importance of considering job density and thinking about opportunities that support family sustaining wages for a diverse range of communities surrounding BMT. They underscored the need for sort of workforce training and hiring programs and really emphasized the desire to see a sort of port first plan as part of this process. For the community development and housing group, again, this sort of focus and desire for contextual development and thinking about sort of more creative residential block typologies that really decenter cars and center pedestrians, and a real interest in sort of seeing other more innovative housing models, whether those be housing co-ops or other types of models. On the waterfront and EJ and resilience group, I think they really emphasize the importance of viewing the Brooklyn Marine Terminal within the context of the larger regional network of industrial and waterfront sites, and really just did not support housing on the site and expressed a lot of frustration around seeing sort of housing and commercial development to be sort of the main revenue driver and thinking about covering the baseline cost for the site. On transportation, there was a real emphasis on sort of public transit and wanting to see a more comprehensive mobility strategy, thinking about improving porosity, both north and south, and east and west, and then NYCHA and NYCHA Youth. Again, a real desire to have this project prioritize the needs of Red Hook houses and address the longstanding capital and infrastructure need, and to ensure that any of the planning related to the site really builds on and recognizes the sort of existing community assets and needs. And I'll pause there just to keep it moving so we can go on to the next slide, and I will pass it off to Jen Sun from EDC.
Thanks, Chris. So I'm Jennifer Sun, EVP of EDC Planning. I'll start with a brief update on BMT operations before we talk about our planning activities. So in partnership with Mike Stamatis, we have completed dive inspections since EDC took management control of the Port Authority. So we wanted to commission our own consultant inspections of the existing piers, including 7, 8, 9A, 9B, and 10. What we found sort of at a high level was that all of these piers with the exception of 9A and 9B, which are out of service, are in fair condition, but require significant capital investment to encase the piles in order to prevent further deterioration. And of the remaining piers that are in service, which are Pier 7, 8, and 10, Pier 10 is in relatively better condition. But all of these piers do require both priority repairs, like I mentioned, the pile encasement, as well as routine repairs that are on the order of magnitude of several $100 million for each of those piers. In addition, we wanted to really demonstrate the city's commitment to clearing the site of cranes that are defunct. And so we're in the process of contracting for the demolition of 4 cranes that are inoperable, just to create more space on Pier 10. And to sort of de-risk, Pier 9A because it is out of service. Also, we're following through in the city's commitment of $15 million in city capital to purchasing a new electric crane. So this is a first and important step in beginning to electrify the port as a part of our commitment to modernizing the port activities at BMT. And then we're also in contract to repair a significant portion of fendering at Pier 10 to minimize further risk of damaging container vessels that are berthing at Pier 10. There was a recent experience where we were all excited about an LNG-powered international container vessel berthing at the Red Hook Container Terminal, but were dismayed that they experienced damage to their vessel as a result of the fendering not being in good condition. So with Mike's support, we've identified that as being a priority repair that we're following through on. And then lastly, a couple of things. We're just rationalizing the site operations to more fully incorporate customs into the Red Hook Container Terminal operations to facilitate more efficient inspection of containers by customs. And finally, EDC is performing a building code compliance and surveys of all of the buildings that are currently occupied with tenants in order to facilitate the regulatory control or authority of building conditions from the Port Authority to the city and DOB as a part of our commitment to this transfer of management control. So with that, I will now transition into an update on our planning work. And I want to start by first providing an overview of the initial development scenarios that the planning team with consultant support looked at. So first, we looked at a scenario of really optimizing the port. We wanted to really center the port planning first and foremost because of the city's commitment to really thinking about how to modernize container and cargo handling at BMT to support the regional supply chain and really achieve policy goals for reducing trucks in neighborhoods, congestion, and really improve air quality in the city. So scenario 1 really focused on optimizing a port with a new marginal pier to replace piers 9A, 9B, and 8. And then we looked at additional opportunities at creating a mixed-use program in the area that we call BMT North, adjacent to the Columbia Waterfront District. And then south of Atlantic Basin near the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal. In this scenario, we also looked at the possibility of including UPS, which is an approximately 14-acre site, to further expand housing opportunities and the creation of commercial and industrial space for job opportunities in the future. Scenario 2 was essentially the same program, the only difference being that we did not include UPS. So here we also looked at optimizing the port and also a mixed-use program at BMT North near the Columbia Waterfront District and Atlantic Basin with commercial and light industrial in both of those areas. In scenario 3, we took a different sort of step at really looking at a couple of big moves. First was testing what the cost benefit would be of moving the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal north towards Brooklyn Bridge Park. The reason being that, Brooklyn Bridge Park is a more well-established destination as well as the Atlantic Avenue shopping district. So we wanted to play with the idea of whether there would be more benefits of situating a new cruise terminal in an established destination or alternatively to consider keeping BCT and by doing so, create the opportunity of really using a redeveloped cruise terminal that is activated for year-round activities to really support placemaking and Red Hook businesses in the local economy there. The other big move under scenario 3 was to look at more housing density at a higher FAR. So unlike scenario 1 and 2, where we looked at housing density at 5.5 FAR, we looked at an FAR of 7 instead at scenario 3 to understand like what the site could support, both from a planning perspective and also from a financial feasibility perspective. In addition to looking at a higher level of density, we also looked at more housing sites being in play. So what you'll notice, for example, is Pier 11 at Atlantic Basin in scenario 3 was contemplated as primarily a housing site rather than for mixed use industrial and commercial development. And then finally, scenario 4. We wanted to acknowledge the potential reality that should we not succeed in working with the task force to affirmatively support a mixed-use program and a port modernization for BMT, that there is a default where EDC and the city do still have financial responsibility in generating revenue in this site, and that we would need to do so under the current manufacturing zoning. So that does limit revenue generating opportunities that could be invested in pure infrastructure for the port, public infrastructure to realize community benefits like new open space and traffic improvements. But the as of right scenario, would be primarily light industrial and really parking and storage uses, just more of what you see on the site today at a much larger scale. So after looking at these scenarios and with input from the task force and from our public engagement, we're proposing to move forward scenario 1, an optimal port mixed-use program that includes UPS. In our presentation, we'll propose some additional options for that scenario to follow. So moving ahead, again, we wanted to take a moment to talk about what we learned from our planning consultants, Moffitt and Nickel, from their market analysis at a regional level, as well as outreach to the maritime industry, specifically other port operators of terminal facilities in other parts of the country, as well as shipping lines. So what we're proposing as a result of what we learned from the industry feedback and from our port planning consultants is really focusing on the creation of a 60-acre modern all-electric port. And we achieve that by combining the existing Pier 10 with a new marginal pier that replaces the finger piers 8, 9A, and 9B. And together with the container terminal remaining at Pier 10 and creating a new marginal pier that we describe as being a flex terminal, this creates the capacity to support not only more container handling at BMT, but also introducing new cargo handling and maritime uses, such as construction staging, handling more bulk cargo, potential specialty cargo from time to time, and also introducing Blue Highway service that is linked with Hunts Point. Next slide. So just to dive a little bit more deeply about what we learned from the market analysis. So it was important that the port planning consultants, Moffitt and Nickel, look not only at competition across the river in New Jersey, but also more regionally at competing terminals in Philadelphia and Wilmington. And so what we learned is that BMT is very much a niche regional port that is unlike the New Jersey ports that are really tailored to serve larger international container vessels that benefit from the rail infrastructure, interstate highway access, and proximity to more markets in New Jersey than what is possible in Red Hook today. Also, what we learned from looking at competing ports in Philadelphia and Wilmington is that those container terminals for decades now have been really focusing on developing a competitive advantage in serving international container vessels that move refrigerated perishables. And that is the market that BMT is directly competing with. Unlike Philadelphia and Wilmington, those terminal facilities also have rail infrastructure and a larger cluster of value-added services like import businesses that we do not have at BMT or the surrounding area. Another big difference is that those container facilities also have millions of square feet of cold storage that is not available at BMT or in the Sunset Park. And so the conclusion of this market analysis is that despite that competition, BMT does have the potential to really lean into serving a niche market of really catering to smaller international container vessels that are currently berthing at Red Hook and are expected to continue to berth at Red Hook if we make the investment in a new marginal pier and new electric container handling equipment that can support more efficient operations without automating the site. And so our consultants believe that we can attract a third service in addition to the two regular services that call at BMT today. This means that the container volume could increase by 50% from 90,000 to 135,000 moves. This would mean that we continue the barge service between BMT and New Jersey because it is valued by customers who receive containers at BMT today to have those ultimate deliveries made by barge to New Jersey, but also introducing new Blue Highway service with containers on barge from BMT to Hunts Point, shipping refrigerated containers to the food distribution center in the Bronx. In addition, as I mentioned, the Flex Terminal could support new maritime activities like construction staging for the future BQE reconstruction, Fidei Seaport, Governor's Island construction and development. And it can do this in a way where multiple maritime activities can happen simultaneously rather than one at a time. So if we go to the next slide, I'll talk about this a little bit more. We've spent a lot of time in thinking about and designing with industry and Mike's feedback an optimal marginal pier in the Flex Terminal that is pushed closer towards the navigation channel in order to save on dredging costs, both upfront and potentially recurring dredging costs of the channel. This also facilitates safer vessel navigation to have a pier line that is essentially sort of the same by having the pier edges sort of line up with each other. This also has the benefit of creating, with the new marginal pier, more linear feet of bulkhead that is important for facilitating simultaneous staging of container and other marine handling activities on that pier. And then finally, there's greater surface area on this larger and deeper wharf that can facilitate more efficient container transloading between Pier 10 and the Flex Terminal to more quickly move containers on barge to Hunts Point for middle mile and last mile delivery. So here we believe that through this design, we're really positioning the port to be as competitive and as attractive as possible for a future port operator to invest private capital alongside the city in modern infrastructure and equipment at BMT. So with that, I will then now pass the mic to Matt Stow from One Architecture to introduce other elements of our planning.
Hi there, can everyone hear me okay? I think I'm unmuted. Yeah, so again, my name is Matthew Stout from One Architecture. I'll be sharing with you further updates on the site planning process. The first that we wanted to share with you is some thinking on overall site circulation and transportation. You move to the next slide. So today we recognize, and we've heard really great feedback from the task force and others about neighborhood traffic related issues throughout the site and in the neighborhood. And what you can see on this diagram is highlighting a few areas that our team has been looking at and making improvements on. First of those is that we understand that both Van Brunt and Columbia are highly congested, both because of vehicle traffic, but also that trucks move through that region as well as buses. We know that some of those streets aren't sufficiently wide, and it shows congestion. Another site planning takeaway that I wanted to share with you is that we recognize that there is limited connectivity from the north to the south side of this region, particularly because of the Hugh Carey Tunnel and this site. We know that Van Brunt Street is really the only street that connects through there. A few things that aren't on this map that we've heard throughout this process, just want to acknowledge, is that we've heard about traffic congestion on Hicks Street and other areas. We know that there's a lot of traffic issues related to vehicles that are trying to bypass the BQE, etc. So not to say that this map is fully comprehensive in terms of the traffic related issues, but we're capturing some of those and still constantly capturing more and more as we learn more from the task force and others. Move to the next slide. So one of the strategies that we're looking at to address some of these issues and also the future site impacts is something that we're calling the BMT spine concept. Now, this isn't the only transportation solution that we're looking at, but it is one concept that we wanted to share more broadly with this group. We'll also acknowledge that in sharing this concept, we've received really productive and pointed feedback from the task force on how this transportation solution can be improved. So our team is currently working on several alternatives based on the feedback that we've gotten, but we'll share with you the current progress that we have. So the basic idea of what we're calling the spine concept is to introduce a new street on the BMT site. That is effectively the blue line that you see on this page. What we're trying to do here is really by introducing a new street through this site, we're trying to shift some of this congestion and traffic I was just talking about that's on Van Brunt and Columbia Street, namely trucks and other traffic, to this spine road, so we can have an opportunity to rethink Van Brunt and Columbia to be more public transit focused and be more of a people mover in that sense. And so you can see in this diagram, the orange yellow line is the corridor that we're thinking of making a strong investment in public transit through that corridor. And again, I just want to acknowledge that that this isn't the only transportation solution that you need for a project of this scale. We understand that there are cascading impacts throughout the entire neighborhood, and we're continuing to work with the task force on additional roadway alternatives. But if you move to the next slide, one opportunity that we've really think is exciting here is that by introducing a new road through the BMT site that would be a publicly accessible road that would define the edge between the port and the neighborhood, is that it can be a multifunctional neighborhood street that really does a lot for the site and does a lot for the community. So you see, this is a conceptual cross-section of what that street could look like. Again, we're proposing a neighborhood street that's similar to scale as many of the streets that exist in the neighborhood today. But as you can see in this section, a lot of green here is that we're thinking of it as really as a linear park where we can make more space for the bicycle greenway, make it much wider, create a green buffer against the port, and introduce flood resilience throughout the site. We'll talk about flood resilience as we move through this presentation, but one thing that's obviously top of mind for us when we're planning a site like this is how do we make all of the elements resilient? And this corridor would be a great location to site a flood wall that would protect the neighborhood. Move to the next slide. And this is a sketch of what that spine corridor could look like. Again, we're imagining this as being the real green buffer between the neighborhood and the port uses, as well as a way to improve transportation through the neighborhood and provide additional space for bicycles, microtransit, and pedestrians. Now I'll move on quickly and talk about open space resiliency and other infrastructure on the site. So we all know that this site really is a great opportunity for expanding public open space and access to the waterfront. As you can see here in the map, there have been some really impressive neighbors that have been built in the last generation, where you're talking about Brooklyn Bridge Park or Governor's Island. And this is really an opportunity to make that level of investment in this area for Red Hook. If we move to the next slide. And so this is a diagram of the public open spaces and the publicly accessible waterfront that currently in the plan. Right now, the plan is proposing over 25 acres of new publicly accessible open space that don't exist today. And we feel that can come in a lot of different forms that would be highly beneficial for the neighborhood. One is to create destination park space, that we're saying meaningful public open space that is large enough to warrant what we call a destination. One of those is, you can see on the left side of the screen, which is on the south of the project, is along the UPS site adjacent to Valentino Pier. Another location that the plan is exploring for a more destination park is on the northern side of the project area adjacent to Brooklyn Bridge Park at Pier 7. But what you can see throughout here is that we're looking for opportunities for green corridors that can really connect the neighborhood together and create those public green spaces that the neighborhood deserves. Move to the next. And within these public open spaces and throughout the entire site, we have to always be thinking about taking advantage of this project to make the site more resilient and the neighborhood more resilient. So these are just a few of the items that the team is integrating within the project. And the first is coastal protection. We're proposing to elevate streets in the development sites, but we're also proposing a flood defense system that, again, would be located between the neighborhood and the port, that would bring a higher level of resilience to the neighborhood. As we develop the plan, we're always looking to do best practices in managing stormwater. It's important that with this investment that this project does not impact the stormwater or wastewater within the upland neighborhood, and capture as much of that water as possible, treat it, and discharge it safely into the river. That will come in the form of an enhanced drainage system that is a hybrid of green and gray infrastructure. And also the buildings play a huge role in this, as buildings themselves can integrate stormwater collection. And lastly, sustainability and electrification is something that is always integrated in a project of this scale. We do imagine this to be an electric and modern port. So as we develop the site plan, ensuring sufficient space for shore power, that the electrical grid can service that shore power, and that we're taking advantage of the site to create renewable energy where we find possible. Move to the next slide. Now I'll talk briefly about the mixed use across the site before we really go into more detail and show you how all of these considerations could play out on the site. So next slide. So based on all the feedback that we've been getting, we really understand that this is an opportunity to create an active, inclusive, and contextual neighborhood. And as you'll see in following slides, we've really taken care based on some specific feedback that we've heard in terms of tall towers, making sure that the development is very contextual to the neighborhood. But before we get to there, I think one thing we wanted to highlight is a great way to make this area more contextual and inclusive is to think about the ground floor uses and how they can be programmed in the right way. And so this is an early draft of how the ground floor programs could be logically distributed across the site in order to activate existing commercial corridors that we know, or enhancing activity along Atlantic Basin. Also ensuring that there's adequate light industrial spaces that remain on the site, that are not necessarily set on the port, but that are really continuing that spirit of what BMT and Red Hook is, which is a mixed use and light industrial neighborhood. Move to the next. And so now we'll talk about how some of these ideas can play out on the site. First, we'll talk about what we call BMT North, which is north of the Hugh Carey Tunnel at Hamilton. And then we'll talk about BMT South. And if we go to the next slide, so what we'll do is we'll step through a few slides, just talking about the diagrammatically how the site plan is shaping up. And then we like to share with you some alternatives that we think are helpful in thinking about trade-offs of between open space and mixed use development. So first, in the northern part of the site area, goal is to activate the site along Columbia Street. So the red dashed line here is showing the extent of the mixed use district area in what we're calling BMT North, which would essentially be an extension of the street blocks that you currently have today between Columbia and Van Brunt. Move to the next. And so by extending the blocks, we mean quite literally is that we feel that extending the streets and extending the existing neighborhood go hand in hand. So what you see here in the yellow are the east-west cross streets that we would expect to be extending into the site and actually meeting Van Brunt Street to create new blocks and really the bones of what would evolve into a new neighborhood. Move to the next. But what's more important than just the streets and the extension of that is really how we think about how public open space can really connect the neighborhood together. And what you see in this diagram on the top right, which we'll see in a little bit more detail in following slides, is really that concept of a destination park at Pier 7. That would be a 7-acre park, which is similar in size to the Pier 6 park area adjacent to it. But we're also looking for opportunities to create these green corridors that move through the site, namely the dark green that you see, which would be the expanded greenway between the port and the neighborhood, but also ideas of creating pedestrianized streets at the mid block of this area, which is in the lighter green, and making green corridors that really just connect the streets through, namely the east-west connector lines that you see there, particularly at Kane Street. Move to the next. In terms of flood resilience, there's a lot of layers of flood resilience that will be integrated into the plan, but a few major moves that we wanted to share with you is one, again, looking at siting a flood defense wall that would be between the port and the neighborhood. But we also have an opportunity upland of that flood defense to elevate the site, to raise it higher to the finished floors that we would expect for the newer developments to be at. As sea levels rise, we want to elevate as much of the site as possible. And that really gives us an opportunity to really help manage water better, to be able to manage entrances into the buildings, and to really just better integrate the flood resilience within the overall neighborhood. Move to the next.
Matt, this is Chris from Devic. So I just want to be cognizant of time. So I think we'll need to just move through more quickly.
Move faster, yeah. So we'll be stepping through a few of these slides really quickly now. So this is a diagram showing the ground floor uses that we're currently proposing along the site, whether it's commercial or makerspace and creative light industrial. The next. In terms of the building massings, I think one important takeaway here that you'll see in all of these is that we're really taking care to make sure that the base heights of the buildings are more contextual and that they're no more than 65 feet when they're facing the neighborhood. Move to the next. And in terms of tower locations, and particularly in the north, it's very important that we listen to what we've heard and make sure that these towers are further away from the neighborhood, and as well as height is concentrated more to the north in and around the Pier 7 area. And so this is what we're calling the baseline plan in this area, and then we'll flip through some iterations here to show you that there's a lot of different ways that we could arrange this particular site. So another option that we looked at is asking the question of whether or not you can really open up some of the site to create more public open space. So this is an option called the bookends, which introduces public open space on either side of the sites. The next option, asking the question of really, can we think of more of a variety of building typologies, a variety of public open spaces that might be smaller, kind of breaking this down. So this is looking at smaller buildings, smaller open spaces. And then the last option is really asking the question of whether or not we can increase the amount of affordable units. And in this particular option, we're looking at a strategy of filling in the space between Pier 7 and 8 to create more space for open space and housing. Move to the next. And here's a summary. I won't go into a whole lot of detail here so we can have time for conversation, but we're looking at the different alternatives there. Then just to show you really quickly, and the Pier 7 open space opportunity, just want to reiterate that this would be 7 acres of public open space, which is in similar size to Pier 6 in Brooklyn Bridge Park today. And there's a couple different ways that you could always think about programming this, and we've shared some sketches. We can move to the next slide, showing how this, what types and scales of programs that could fit along in this area, namely whether we're talking about lawns, overlooks, amphitheaters, etc., or something more naturalistic. And that's the next option here that we wanted to share for feedback, which is thinking more about sloped lawns and step downs and the like. So again, there's a lot of flexibility here. We wanted to give you a sense of what 7 acres could potentially fit. And so closing out in this area, just want to share a few sketches of this area. So this is a view looking north along Columbia. So the BMT site is to the left and DeGraw Street is in the foreground. And this is a sketch of what this could potentially look like. So again, what you can see is more contextual building heights along Columbia Street. Some ideas of prioritizing Columbia Street for public transit and making it green, and some ideas of really thinking about a more pedestrian-oriented thoroughfares like what you see on the left here. So move to the next.
Matt,
and here's another.
sorry to interrupt. I'm going to suggest that I think in the interest of time that this might be a good moment to pause.
Yeah.
It seems like from the chat that the participants on this call might already be familiar with what we wanted to present, and there's an interest in having a Q&A and then breakout groups. So I'll turn it to Mikhail to help facilitate the next session. So thanks, Matt.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Jennifer. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mikhail Adgate. I lead the Government and Community Relations team at EDC. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. We're going to start now by opening it up with a large group QA. And so we'll take some time to do questions that everyone can hear before we break out into our breakout rooms for more individualized conversation between advisory group members and task force members. So I will kick it to our tech facilitator. If folks could use the raise hand function, we can stop and take some questions and comments. I am not currently seeing any questions just yet, but oh, I
Amy,
see Amy. Thank you. Amy, can we start with you, please?
Hi. I just want to ask about the process. I'm trying to understand, we've given a lot of feedback and we're not really seeing that reflected in these slides. Again, we're being shown the same slides and having the same conversation from the group. So I'm trying to understand, when are our comments going to be incorporated into some of these designs?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Amy. So just as a reminder, for those who don't know Amy, she is both a proxy, a task force member, in addition to an advisory group member. So there's a lot of material that was shared this evening that, as a task force member, she has already been presented. But Amy, since there are other advisory group members on who have not necessarily seen all of this content in the same way that the task force has, that's why we're sharing what was, say, presented at the last task force meeting, so that we can solicit feedback. And then when we bring feedback to the task force, it's representative of what we heard from tonight and other engagement. I see John next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, and maybe for our facilitator, if you could take down the QA slide so that folks can see each other. Thank you. Go ahead, John.
First of all, there's questions in the chat that you could probably go through. Second,
Yes.
the reason why that's happening with Amy right now and all of that is because you give different groups different information at different times, and that's, if all of this meeting could be public, even if everybody else couldn't, like, be a part of it and ask questions or whatever, but all of this should be out in the open. The lack of transparency was created like chaos here, with some groups know this, the other ones don't, the other ones this, that, they're talking, they don't know what, and I'm going to go back to what I've always said. What is the justification for using a GPP here? At one time, it was because we were rushing and the mega grant and all of that. Are we still even thinking about a mega grant? Because that's not coming. And why do we have to use a GPP when everybody believes that the city property is supposed to go through a city process? So I would just like that explained again, please.
Sure, I'm happy to start off, and then Jennifer Sun can add. So if you remember where we started about a year ago, where this site, the majority of it was owned by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey and governed by a tri-party agreement between the City of New York, the State of New York, and the Port Authority. As part of the arrangement, the transaction is separating the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, so that EDC and the city, is working with community on the vision for it. And the state, through the Port Authority, will have Howland Hook on Staten Island. So because of that, those two pieces of the transaction, the GPP, excuse me, and for those who remember, that's called the General Project Plan. That is the mechanism to do those two transactions. And to your comment about why tonight's meeting isn't completely open to the public, as Chris mentioned at the top, we had requests from multiple advisory group members to have a time where AGs could talk and hear from one another. And so that is tonight's purpose. And then Monday night, March 24th, is our public workshop. I appreciate that it's frustrating because this has been very iterative between these different engagement groups.
But actually what we wanted was an in-person. It's hard to talk like this. We wanted, like the way the workshops are, put all the groups together that we can talk amongst ourselves and all of that. This is not really what we asked for. Checks off a
I
box,
see.
but this isn't really helpful for us. And the GPP answer, that's not really a full satisfactory answer. It doesn't have to be. That's the whole point. It was a decision made. The transfer was done, right? Or it's when does the city officially take possession of the property? Is there a date?
Yeah, so Jennifer Sun, I might ask you to remind me in terms of the transaction procedures and where we were with board approval last spring through the GPP.
Yeah, so the GPP, as Mikhail's explained, is necessary in order to transfer ownership of BMT from the Port Authority to the city and EDC. So EDC's role right now is only in managing the site. We do not own the site. So we must go through GPP in order to be able to take ownership of the site and have full control over its long-term future, and to have the ability to put an RFP out for a future operator that offers a longer-term lease than the 5-year agreements that the Port Authority had been making short-term commitments to Mike Stamatis. And so that's a fundamental change that we want to be able to effectuate with the support of GPP and assuming full ownership of the site.
Thanks, Jennifer. Before I go to the next comment, which is Victoria, I do want to take one comment from the chat. I saw Carolina from Portside had asked a couple of questions about why Portside was not explicitly named in our emerging themes. And I will just say that in addition to Portside, we heard asks about space for other community and workforce organizations like RHI, like the Harbor School and others. And just for that summary slide, we didn't include all of the organizations that were requested. So I'll just make note of that and then take a question from Victoria.
Mikhail, can I jump in real quick? Because I can't figure out how to do raising my hand. I just had a quick comment I wanted to add before I have to run. So first thing is regarding Portside, I forgot to mention Carolina. So I do think it's important, you know, in terms of for sure preserving the fabric of the community and folks that are fierce defenders of the port, like Carolina, that there is a future home potentially, in my opinion, for Portside. I'll just say as a comment, I think it's important to retain as much of the community that's here today as possible. Number two, I had a question about the IBZ space in terms of what is being lost and what is being gained. I may have missed it in the slides, forgive me. But I think it's important that there's, parity in terms of what we're losing and what we're gaining, and ensuring that we're preserving as much of the IBZ space as possible. And my last question is, in terms of local business in the future, as all this unfolds and potentially develops, again, I think it's important that as many local businesses have opportunities to remain and avoid being dislocated and sort of left behind. So in terms of all the new developments, is there any thought about how we reach out and to local businesses in the future, what benefits they may be offered in terms of first priority, for example, and any new spaces or amenities that may get built? And just in general, preserving as much of the local fabric of the community, which includes all the many businesses and community. So I'm sorry to interrupt. I just couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. Sorry.
Thank you, Mike. For your question about the industrial commercial, I'm going to kick it to Jennifer and to Matt.
Yeah, so from, I suppose, an accounting perspective to your question, Mike, based on the proposed optimal port plan, we would be preserving about 67 acres of maritime uses. So the 60-acre container terminal and flex terminal, 5 acres that's related to the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal, and then approximately 2 acres for the future home port. So that means that approximately 55 acres of the 122-acre site is being proposed for mixed-use development that also notably, in addition to housing and commercial space, also includes light industrial space. If we were to have continued in our presentation, this group would have learned that we are proposing approximately 250,000 square feet of modern light industrial space being created as a part of that mixed-use program, in addition to the 67 acres that we would be preserving for maritime industrial uses.
Thank you, Jen, because that's kind of where I was heading. I think if there is, for example, a plan for the UPS site that involves any new housing, for example, it sounds like you're focusing on as well as adding and preserving IBZ space, which I think is important to many of us here.
Understood. So if we were to put UPS in play, we're contemplating a mixed-use program. To be transparent, it does mean housing, but also the opportunity to create commercial and light and industrial space on that site as well.
Okay, thank you.
Michaela, you're on mute.
Apologies, everyone. It's only been like 5 years of this. Sorry, Victoria. Thanks for your patience. You could go ahead.
I have a follow-up question to John's question. Our time could have been better used if you guys just recorded a presentation and sent it to us going through the slides. This is a very engaged community, all the task force members and the advisory committee. We could have not wasted the 2 hours we thought we were going to be with the advisory committees and talking with the task force on reviewing this. We're educated people. Let's try to do this more efficiently so that we're not wasting time, because these are important conversations that we're having. My follow-up question for John, what John's comment is that why are these task force meetings not recorded and at least shared with us, but they should be shared with the public? You guys are supposed to be the representatives of this, and this is not democracy. It's happening behind closed doors without information, and you're seeding more distrust within the community by not letting the task force member meetings be recorded and sent out so that we can learn and be educated from the experts that you guys have put on this panel that are not elected, that, I don't want to say that they don't credit, but this is not democracy. We're fighting across this whole country about creating a democratic process, and it's starting at the top that's getting destroyed. Let's start here at the bottom and create a more democratic process, and that should be through the Euler process that has city oversight for a city piece of property. I'm really frustrated with the feedback we've gotten back from the community, because we're holding our own meetings within the community because we don't feel like we're being heard in the EDC and WXY spaces. You reach 1,600 people. What percentage of the Red Hook Columbia waterfront community is that? We're hearing there's a lot of trust for the EDC based on their relationship with the Brooklyn cruise ship terminal. Everybody that came to our meeting last night, over 20% of them have not heard anything about this project. What this process is failing, and we need to fix the process and start all over to make a process that actually is inclusive and that reaches the community members, because nobody knows this is happening. And we're not getting the information from you guys so we can talk to each other ahead of time, and we're wasting time going through half this people on this call have already heard this presentation. And you guys dropped a whole bomb about housing in the middle of the process. And so now that's all we can talk about is the housing element and not talk about the port and the future port that we were promised. So I'm really frustrated, and just going through that presentation and hearing the comments, I'm sorry for this, but I feel like there's some questions that need to be answered about why is the information not public to this community? Why is the community not educated by the conversation so we can understand how you get to the end result? You're not taking us with you. Go ahead. Sorry. Take us with you. I want to learn from the experts that are on the task force.
I thank you for your comments, Victoria. I think I'll start with the first one on the task force structure. So as a reminder, this structure was created with the task force leadership, Congressman Goldman, Senator Grunardis, Councilmember Aviles. And the goal of the advisory groups and the public workshops was to create multiple levels of space for engagement. Now, I absolutely hear the frustration that given the timeline, that the way that information has come out and the way that feedback is being interpreted is not what the community prefers. And I absolutely hear that feedback, so I don't want to diminish it. I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind. The first is that even with a GPP, there will be continued engagement. There will be environmental review. There will be ongoing conversations for this community to really continue to work on what the plan is before going to GPP. As Jennifer said at the top in the different scenarios that we showed, part of what we're trying to wrestle with right now is even an understanding about the community's support as well as the task force's support for, you know, a mixed use opportunity for a 60-acre port, you know, optimizing the maritime uses. So it has been an iterative process. I don't want to diminish that, but that is sort of how we ended up in this particular structure. I do want to take Matthias next.
I think Victoria, she seemed to have a follow-up.
Oh, I'm
Do
sorry.
you wanna? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Victoria.
All right, I was just gonna say, and Carlene, I forgot to say, you know, RHI and the Harbor School are not physically on the water currently, and Portside is, and that's the difference, and that's why they should be there. Secondly, Goldman and Gennardis have not represented this neighborhood for the last 20 to, Carlene, you can correct me on the dates. We have been redistricted and we lost our representation through Nadler and Nydia Velasquez, who are our allies, who knew the waterfront and knew this neighborhood. And these are new electeds that are at the table. And so they should defer back to the neighborhood on what the conversation should be and not to decide how the structure should be for the task force, because we had electeds that were in line with this community, and I don't think they really checked in, these people that just showed up here, about what that structure should look like for the task force. So we had two different representatives for a very long time, and now we're at a loss, I think.
Laura? Oh no, Matthias, I'm sorry. You ended up getting lost in the.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to see if you can clarify as scenario 1 was more developed in this presentation. Does that mean that this is the scenario you're proposing to put forward for a vote? That would be 1, just to understand that. Number 2 is if you can speak more on UPS's role in whether they would be staying on the site and there would be development for them, or does this support activating a Blue Highway initiative throughout the New York Harbor, or what? Basically, what's UPS doing around this? And third, if within the scenarios, if we are beyond if scenario 1 is not already decided as what's being put forward, if there is still movement on land use, because otherwise it's unclear how the feedback and advice being provided makes it at all or not. I believe these scenarios were presented originally at the end of the year or beginning of this year. So where did the feedback reach, if at all? So those are 3 separate questions. Thank you.
Sure. I'm gonna ask Jennifer Sun to kick us off about the scenarios, and then we can pull in others.
The scenarios that we presented in January were a starting point to get feedback from the task force, advisory group members, and the public on the proposed land use framework for BMT. What we are continuing to refine is scenario 1. And so again, tonight's presentation would have presented some different options for how we think about the distribution of bulk and height in the mixed-use program areas at BMT North near the Columbia Waterfront District and Atlantic Basin and on the UPS site. What is not changing is our proposal for a 60-acre container terminal and flex terminal. We started our overall planning for BMT with port planning first and foremost, recognizing that that is the most important, but also most challenging piece of infrastructure to design for. And so that 60-acre port is really proposed with a lot of industry and consultant market analysis and feedback on what is the best configuration in order for BMT to compete for more container service to happen in Red Hook. What we found from that analysis was that space is not the constraint. Instead, some key constraints are the channel depth, the lack of rail infrastructure, lack of interstate highway infrastructure. Those are fundamentally lacking at BMT, so it will never have a future like the New Jersey container terminals that we see across the harbor. That said, it also affirmed positively that there is a future for BMT to continue to serve a niche market of smaller container vessels and to grow that business along with future Blue Highway. So with investment in that new marginal pier and new container handling equipment, we believe those are the key drivers in order to modernize the port and grow its capacity for the future rather than space. Blue Highway and UPS. So UPS, we are continuing to have conversations with UPS about their interest in joining this planning effort. That has not been finalized yet. Those conversations are ongoing. Through those conversations, we've learned that UPS is interested in Blue Highway service. In fact, they, I think, had partnered with Mike Stamatis to explore the idea of piloting container on barge together from barging containers or trailers, UPS trailers from their Bayonne facility, where they've invested a lot of capital in redeveloping a waterfront site in Bayonne, and of potentially investing in the waterfront infrastructure in Bayonne to support a container on barge service being launched from Bayonne to ship UPS trailers from Bayonne to BMT to reduce truck traffic across bridges. So they do, in fact, have an interest in Blue Highway, and that is a possible use if they were to join this planning effort.
Thanks, Jennifer. We'll go to Carolina next.
Thanks. I have some comments, but a question first. Mikhail, who's the longest standing tenant at BMT?
That I don't have the answer to, but perhaps David Lowen does. Sorry, David, can you hear us?
I can answer it.
Okay, thanks, Carolina.
The longest standing tenant is Portside, New York. So in your answer that, you know, Portside wasn't mentioned because other groups have mentioned other things, I'm just going to state for those who are not following it as closely, I don't expect everyone to follow the status of the mentions of Portside. We're not mentioned in your BMT list. We're not mentioned, we're not included in your videos with BMT tenants. We're not on maps. We're not on presentations. The deck for tonight had slide 63 existing conditions showing the Mary Whale in the background, though without a label. And the proposal for the new vision, slide 64, there's no Mary Whale. You know, you have, and I've come to memorize some of these slide numbers by heart. Task Force 7 deck, slide 33, there's a new activated waterfront Atlantic Basin celebrating maritime history for locals and visitors with no port sign. So we have a historic ship with a long run of pedigree, the last of her type in the country, a virtual museum and guide to Red Hook. We invite historic ships and everything else. And all of the plans that we have had wanting to execute for 20 years, May will mark 20 years since our first business plan, mesh perfectly with all of your goals from BMT. But it's noteworthy that there's this, it's an erasure. And I'm just elevating it now politely. Everybody sees it. And if you really want workforce and we have identified partners for years eager to do this, to particularly get people on boats, workboat crew. Those are the workhorses of the Blue Highway. We have strong connections in the neighborhood. We have all sorts of things. We are ready to do this. I will add, the EDC also promised Portside Space to do all of that years ago. And that was a give back to the Red Hook community. And when asked to join an advisory group, I said we were willing. And I suggested that we have a meeting. So for those of you who are new to this story, to hear about it. I'm trying to focus on the future, but I'm just mentioning the past now because this erasure, it's just, I'm flagging it for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. I do want to go back to Laura. Apologies, Laura.
Hi. Is there anything you guys want to say more to what Carolina had just raised, or are you ready to move on?
I mean, I think I will say at the top that I absolutely, hear Carolina's points. I think we have, have had a lot of conversations, and even in my time at EDC, about improving engagement and working together. And I appreciate how you've been a partner in this process and the cruise traffic process. So, by no intent is there a goal to try to erase Portside's impact or work in the community. I hear what you're saying on how it looks that way. And so I'll just acknowledge it with saying that it is not, an active attempt to erase the history or relationships that Portside has in the community. So Laura, I'll go to you next.
So I just want to say that before I get to my specific question, there are so many great questions in the chat. And these are questions that the advisory groups, at least the ones I've been participating in, the transportation and mobility and the housing, have been asking over and over again, and not necessarily getting any answers to. So I would just request that perhaps, I'm assuming someone's keeping a record, someone from EDC is keeping a record of the chat. If you could please, return to us with answers to all the questions that are in the chat, whether that's in another Zoom, whether it's in an in-person, whether it's, on a email, like in some way, shape, or form, please address all of the questions that are in the chat, since we don't have a chance to get to all of those tonight. And then I wanted to say that, echoing what many people have already said in the chat and in person, there is a lot of feedback that we've been providing that doesn't seem to be reflected in the planning and the scenario and the slides we've seen tonight. So one of those things, for example, is the spine road. It was a little confusing to me the way it was presented tonight, although I know we went quickly over it, because I felt like I heard a lot of caveats from the presenter, like, well, this is just a draft, and well, we're making improvements and we're still working on it. So I guess my question is, why are you presenting something that is maybe close to finalized, or maybe is nowhere close to finalized? It's very hard for us as community members to react to something affirmatively or negatively if it is still like very much a draft. So that's one point. And the second point, and then I'll wrap up, is that, we have a lot of concerns about this concept of the spine road, particularly the premise that I seem to hear articulated again and again, which is it will divert traffic. I think if anything, it will induce traffic. It's very well known in transportation planning, right, that the more roads you build, the more roads you expand, the more you induce cars and trucks. So it's really unclear to us as a community what the thinking is, that you're just going to build this new road and all the trucks and cars will shift over to that road, leaving the original roads suddenly free and clear. Like that doesn't compute. I'm really confused. So thank you very much for answering these questions.
Thanks.
Yes,
So
Matt,
go ahead, Matt.
I could take that. That's okay. Just one thing, yeah, there were some caveats because this is an ongoing planning process, and it does take time to develop alternatives when we receive feedback. So we're currently working on those alternatives, but hear you loud and clear in terms of the point that that adding a new road without certain measures would just generate more traffic, and you're not really going to divert that traffic. So in forthcoming meetings, we will be talking about additional alternatives where we do have some concepts where we feel like you can manage that traffic and ensure that it does move to the spine road as opposed to just creating a redundant road that creates more traffic, because we hear you loud and clear on that. But I just want to reiterate that this is an iterative process, and we'll be showing you more details in forthcoming meetings.
Amanda?
Thank you. So I kind of want to go back really quickly to one of the things that John asked. And I think that all of us recognize, while I'm sure you've also heard a lot of issues, there's a lot, we are making this decision against what the alternatives are. And there's a lot of unknowns that you guys cannot answer for us, right? You can't tell us definitively whether we're losing that federal grant to this administration. You can't tell us what might happen if we have a new mayor. You can't tell us what will happen to construction costs or like the cost of this project if we get into a trade war. Like, you can't even tell us if we're going to be living in a democracy a year from now. But there is something that you could tell us that I think would be very helpful in terms of decision making. And that is what actually happens. Not scenario 4, right? But if there is a no vote, if there is no agreement, okay? So when asked, when does the city get this land? The answer is when there's a GPP. If that doesn't happen, right? If there's a no vote, does that mean the city retains the land and eventually tries again for a GPP in the future, in which case, if that is so, would that trigger a task force again? Or would this now be city gets to go forward in GPP without the task force? Or is it that it goes through anyway, the city gets the land, and then we're in ULURP territory? Because I think that that MOU is very unclear. I feel like this answer is there's constant evasion. And so this is something, as the people who entered into this agreement, right? You have mapped out, I'm sure your decision tree is like there. Can you please tell us if there is a no vote, not just what the scenario is going to look like right away, right? But like what actually happens? Do you go for a GPP again? Does that trigger the task force? Does it end up in city hands somehow? Otherwise, does it go to ULURP one day? Does the Port Authority get it back? What happens? Direct answer, please.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm going to kick it to Jen for this one.
I think the direct answer is that we are not in a position to hypothesize sort of those what ifs right now. Our focus right now is really, trying to propose a plan that does incorporate feedback. And I think we've tried to explain that the reason why you're not seeing additional feedback incorporated in the presentation today was because the intent of this meeting was to actually share the same information with advisory groups and task force members.
This is not responsive to my question. I'm sorry, Jennifer, because I don't want to waste people's time, because my question wasn't that. My question isn't, well, why aren't you answering my question? That's what your response was. I don't want to answer your question because we're not focused on that. That's okay if you're not. But a lot of these people are, and a lot of the people that you want to buy into what is being sold here are very much focused on knowing what that alternative looks like. So it's not like that I'm not asking like whether you want to talk about it, or whether I'm asking just the question. Can we just get the answer to that question? And if you say, we know it, but we don't want to tell you, that's also an answer. But we need the answer.
The team on the call today, we would take a beat in this process if the task force votes no. And then, there's a group of people, decision makers, right, that would then make a decision about whether EDC would try to find another path forward to at least realizing the modernization of the port in some way, or leave it to a future administration. I can't speak for those decision makers, in this moment, but those are sort of the scenarios that we might consider. Is there a way for us to somehow be able to advance pieces of the project, or to just pause it entirely and leave it to a future, EDC leadership team and City Hall leadership to then think about, and then the next step and how to approach this differently?
Hey, Jen, can I jump in, Jen, real quick? Because this is, again, it's a great question, but it's a vital question, right? This property cannot go back to the Port Authority, right? And I don't mean in a sense of a legal term. If it goes back to the Port Authority, it is doomed. And everything that we're trying to accomplish in terms of the port and a certainty, and God only knows what will happen to the site in terms of the entire site, because the entire site will most likely be redeveloped under a Port Authority leadership at this point.
Right, and Mike, but the part of this question as well, because this is also relevant to you, is if it stays with the city and the city can come back with the GPP, whether the task force provision stays triggered is important, right? Because this is something that continues to give you and other maritime stakeholders a voice in that process, just like with the community. So if that's what this means, is you take a beat, you come back, you have fancy lawyers, do you know whether you get to come back without us? Or, and not necessarily us, like me, us, but I mean the task.
I personally would advocate and work towards either this task force or a new task force or whatever that looks like, but there will need to be continual engagement. If this process doesn't go forward, and in my opinion, I certainly hope it does, because it's that important to the future of this area, this port community. I'm just here to say that we definitely don't want it to go back to the Port Authority. I don't think anybody in the community should think that would be a good idea. I certainly think there should continue to be a level of engagement like we have today, if this plan does not ultimately go forward in the next month or so at the task force level. And if we need to come back and regroup and take a beat, that's fine. But the city's long-term commitment, I think here is very important. This site is in a state of disrepair. In 5 years, potentially less, there won't be a port if we don't have an entity and the city is not continually investing in it. And if it were to go back to the Port Authority, those people would only care about one thing. And it's the same thing they've cared about for the last 30 years, and that is closing the port and turning the entire 122 acres into whatever their imagination suits. So none of us want that to happen. So it's important that we either come to a resolution soon under this current process, or, as Jen said, take a beat if necessary. But I think it's important to get something done soon. There's so much uncertainty, as you mentioned, about who the next mayor may be. I can tell you that certain past mayoral candidates had nothing good to say about the port, for example. We're only interested in commercial redevelopment. And I'm not going to name names, but it's a lot of information out there on that. So I don't know who the next mayor will be, but it's important that we have a path forward as soon as possible that we can all sort of live with in terms of everything that's being proposed. So yeah, that's a great question, Amanda. And I think for me, this process will have to continue at some level and be led by the electeds that are in charge of the task force and leading it, for sure. So I think that's a very, very important question. And the answer probably will have to come at some point sooner rather than later. But I think we would, in my opinion, continue to engage at this level. One other thing I'll add while I have the floor, again, sorry for jumping in. But I just want to address Carolina one more time. I personally will commit to ensuring that, as I've said before, Red Hook Container Port must go on, and Carolina must go on. So Carolina, you have my full support. I will continue to engage on your behalf to make sure that you are also part of any future here and what that looks like. The other thing I want to ask a question on is the NYCHA housing, folks. As part of this plan, I've seen the number of affordable housing units. Jen, maybe somebody else can answer for me because this is personally important. What direct benefit will the NYCHA folks have in terms of access to any new affordable housing? What's being planned as far as benefits for the NYCHA homes, repairs, other investments as part of all this? Because, as I said earlier, nobody can be left behind.
So Mike, to your question about NYCHA, we've been in conversations with NYCHA about how we might work together as a part of the BMT process and looking for ways in which the project might be able to support modernization of Red Hook houses in a phased way. One scenario in which that could happen is if we are able to create, as a part of the BMT affordable housing, units that can be offered to NYCHA residents at a certain sort of density that would allow then a building to be decanted at the Red Hook Houses campus to then begin the process of capital improvements and building, better quality housing at the NYCHA campus. But those conversations are really preliminary. And so I think just today I would say, we have a commitment to continuing to think creatively about ways in which we can support modernization of Red Hook houses as a part of this process.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate that. Very important that Cameron and the other residents there really are part of this and benefit from it.
Thanks, Saul. I'm going to go to Michael next.
Hey, all, good evening. I just want to make a clarification for those who may not be following the chat that, and Mikkel already explained the mistake that Red Hook Initiative hasn't made a request for space. And so just wanted to clarify that to all of our neighbors who are here on the call. I think that, my real concern as we are fast approaching this, Jen, you just embarked on the conversation about housing, you said at a certain density, and you've told us what that density is. You all have purported that this design is something that's a response to a housing crisis for the city of New York, but I don't think that the New York City does not have a luxury housing crisis. We have a working class, middle class, under-resourced, poor housing crisis. And the notion that 25% of these houses, 1,300 units, that less than 400 of them would go to affordable housing in a way that's not clear, that you all are not still certain about. It just seems unacceptable as a percentage that this does not really represent community priorities. I have spent a lot of time with you all in these past few months. I deem you all as skilled, talented, and intelligent people with knowledge that I don't have. And that's why I don't really understand why there's none of these scenarios that were presented before today include one that does not focus on housing as the predominant means of revenue generation. We've had deep conversations and mentioned many times today Blue Highway, but modeling around that innovative and unique response that could be so economically and environmentally effective for the borough and for the city writ large that that revenue generating model hasn't really been a priority, just a kind of conversation. And so, especially considering that what we've heard from this presentation in recent days, that the floodplain resiliency concerns, which we all knew when we told you from the start, would especially is now we're understanding has a compounding cost to the port and to the housing itself. And so, I just want to understand why we're not talking about these other options and the mixed use industrial and really understanding it better. So I think the last piece that I'll say is that, you know, whether Matthew Stout, the architect who spoke earlier, whether he said so intentionally or not, the designs that were shown today and that have been shown to the task force recently really do embody a new neighborhood, is what he called it. And I think it's more clear to me today through these the visuals that were shared that this is ostensibly a creation of a gated neighborhood, a not gated neighborhood. We are an extremely bifurcated neighborhood as it is, which is the impacts of that we've experienced serving the people of the houses for these 22 years that we've done so. And so, you know, I see this. I want to remind you all that in my art, whether you see it this way or not, this is the Red Hook Marine Terminal. And the use of Brooklyn Marine Terminal is part of this bisecting, this bifurcation that feels like, you know, an invisibilization that Carolina spoke to and others, Carolina spoke to and others, that this is kind of feels invisibilizing to a historic, beautiful, important neighborhood. And I think we don't feel sufficiently seen. I think that's clear from the conversations that we've been having. We've had many conversations without you and have had to do so in order to engage our neighborhood the best that we can. And that feels really clear from the people that we've spoken to.
So Michael, I'll try to address some of your questions if I can remember your feedback, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share your questions and concerns. So about housing, we're not focusing only on market rate housing here. I think generally, if you increase the supply of housing, that has the overall benefit of reducing the cost of housing, whether that's market rate or affordable housing. The reason why market rate housing is important is because it does generate revenue that can then help pay for public benefits like creating more open space that would be accessible not only to new residents at BMT, but to residents of the surrounding neighborhood as well. With respect to Blue Highway and its potential for revenue generation, based on the research that we've done in talking with other cities that have more well-established Blue Highway service, like Paris, that's been in place for 5 to 10 years. Those Blue Highway services are barely operating at a break-even level, and it took 5 to 10 years or more in order for Blue Highway service to be as competitive as trucking, to secure sort of the customers and the demand that makes it a profitable enterprise. The reality is that as excited as this and committed that EDC in the city is to investing in peer infrastructure, not only at BMT, but also in other waterfront sites like Hunts Point and in Manhattan to repurpose those waterfront landings for Blue Highway service. The reality is operating a Blue Highway service would not be revenue generating from day one or even in year 5. Our understanding is that it will likely require an operating subsidy. And so we actually are looking at programs that offer tax incentives and other benefits that would make Blue Highway service more financially feasible. So the punchline is that Blue Highway is an important policy goal, but it is not a source of revenue for paying for infrastructure at BMT. Same thing with industrial. The reality is, as important as it is for a number of policy and equity reasons for the city to continue to invest in the industrial sector, industrial rents are not high enough to pay for the cost of building new industrial space or even rehabilitating industrial space. We had a recent example of putting an RFP out for over 100,000 square feet of vacant Pier 11 shed space for industrial and maritime uses. And even though we got strong proposals in response to that RFP, those proposals required either a rent abatement, so they weren't paying rent for a long period of time, and or potentially needed capital subsidy as well. So in that instance, and it also the experience of EDC managing millions of square feet of industrial space in Sunset Park, Hunts Point, Bathgate, and other areas of the city, consistently we have found that industrial rents is not a positive net revenue generating use. And then finally, I think the notion of a gated neighborhood is one that I would dispute. If anything, there's a lot of intention in our planning process to really think about how to integrate the existing neighborhoods with BMT. And doing so by, introducing and extending the street network into the site to strengthen connections between the new neighborhood and the existing neighborhood, to create more public waterfront access than exists today, and more public open space at near Brooklyn Bridge Park, Red Hook, and a lot of open spaces in between. So the goal of the project is actually neighborhood integration, not to create further isolation as a result of this project.
Thank you. Trequan?
Hello. How you doing? My name is Trey Kwan Bakar. I'm the Director of Career Connections for Good Shepherd Services, but Red Hook born, longtime Red Hook resident. Just wanted to raise something that I put in the chat as far as like how we can kind of use this project to invest in the community, right? The existing community there. I think it's very important that if we've raised this. I'm also part of the NYCHA advisory group. Like we've raised this as well, like how do we nurture some workforce training programs to reconnect young people and residents to the waterfront, because the waterfront is a resource that there's a lot of careers that can come out of it. And I think if we have a lot of big projects coming to this part of Brooklyn, right? Like we have the offshore wind project coming. Hopefully that's not, delayed or paused. But, a strong way to kind of uplift community is to connect people to high access jobs. And if we have an opportunity to kind of train residents on some of the careers that come with the waterfront revamping and come with some of these offshore wind projects, then we can plant some seeds that can really be a big investment and have some good outcomes. So, we've talked about this. I'm just want to re-raise the issue, and I know like I've seen like a school put on the presentation. I definitely want to just make sure, all right, who is this school for, right? Like if we're doing the school, like it wouldn't be uncommon to kind of have like a elementary school come for people who don't want to send their kids to PS15s, right? Like I think it needs to be clarity on what is actually being put there, and I think that the investment in trying to do some workforce training programs. I know Carolina has even hit on that doesn't need to be unseen, and we need to follow through on that. So I just wanted to raise that again. Thank you.
Thank you, Trequan. That's very consistent with the feedback that we've heard from the beginning, that any future vision for this site has to think about workforce development, workforce training, not just for, the Blue Highway and the container port and flex maritime uses, but also any industrial, commercial uses that are included, tourism opportunities with a revamped cruise terminal. And so, appreciate that feedback, and certainly, working with our team and the workforce advisory group to think through what are the career pipelines for young people. Before I go back to Victoria and Matthias, I see that Arif has a raised hand, so want to make sure that we get to folks that haven't had a chance to speak yet.
Thank you. Going back to an earlier comment, I was just curious why the burden is specifically on housing to generate income. I think we can all agree that we agree with the ideas behind the Blue Highway and the industrial port and the benefits that will bring not only to the community but to the city. But I think it's a key word there, city. These are citywide initiatives. It's going to benefit the entire city. And so it just seems a little bit unfair to put the burden on housing and the community. I think, at least where I'm at, and I think some other people would agree, is, we want housing. Affordable housing is important, and it should be done intentional and strategic. And I think people would be willing to have that kind of housing in the neighborhood. But when it's kind of proposed as market rate, I just don't know if that kind of the stress on the infrastructure in the neighborhood and the kind of other associated problems with increased population it is worth it.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'd like Jennifer, if you could sort of reiterate what you were saying earlier about revenue generation between industrial commercial uses versus housing.
Yeah, I can reiterate that point, but I think maybe a new point that I'll add is the following about why market rate housing that actually can help cross-subsidize not only pure infrastructure, but importantly, more affordable housing at BMT. So, one of the things that we shared with the task force, and that I'll share, here with the advisory group members is, there's different ways of paying for affordable housing, and a lot of the sources have very limited supply, meaning specifically low-income housing tax credits, direct city capital subsidy, or tax-exempt bond financing. There's a very long waiting list of projects across the city that are waiting for access to that kind of capital to subsidize affordable housing. So market rate housing in a market like, the one that BMT is in has at least the strong sort of market economics to be able to generate the kind of excess revenue to be able to directly cross-subsidize affordable units at BMT. So that's one reason why we are so focused on market rate housing as a tool, as one financing tool for paying for affordable housing at BMT, rather than relying on other resources that are tapped out that would then have the effect of slowing our ability to deliver affordable housing at BMT and potentially make it more expensive, because the longer you wait, the more risk you are at creating a funding gap and then having to find even more capital to subsidize that affordable housing. Also, in looking at the range of revenue generating uses, we kept coming back to housing generating the highest revenue potential, but there are other uses that can generate excess revenue, like hotels, like commercial and retail. So that is included in the mixed use program. So we're not looking just to housing as the only revenue source for the project, but other mixed uses as well.
Thank you. Back to Victoria.
Great. Yeah, I also had a question about this because I don't know if you know, my other job is in real estate. And so I'm looking at other new developments here in Red Hook and realizing properties like 199 Conover Street, 160 Imlay Street, I have a property listed there right now, are languishing on the market. There is a real, supply and demand issue here in Red Hook, and that the demand for luxury property is, oversaturated, and there's not enough buyers to reach that demand. So I'm interested in what model you're using between rentals and sales to justify the finances in this process, because I don't think that the amount of people that want to live in Red Hook barely meets the amount of units that are available now. So without changing the traffic and transportation issues to get to Red Hook, and solve for that, I don't think they're going to have suddenly a huge amount of people that are going to want to live in a transportation desert for rental or sale. So I'm interested in how you use the financing, and will some of the affordable housing be purchase structures rather than just rental structures? And will they be in perpetuity? There's a lot of questions.
Yeah, thank you for that, Victoria. Jennifer, I wanted to see if Matt Furlong from our real estate team is still on and is able to talk a little bit about the modeling. I can't tell if he is still on.
Calling Matt.
Sorry, Jennifer, why don't you start?
We looked at rent comps in the surrounding neighborhood, so meaning Red Hook, Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, downtown Brooklyn. So we did take actual rent comps from those surrounding areas in order to make assumptions about the rent that could be achieved both for market rate units and
So can you tell me
market
what
rate
what's
units.
what's a 1 bedroom, what do you for rent, what would you use using as a number?
I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I think we've shared that with the advisory group, and if not, we can share that in our follow-up.
Okay.
I would also note that, I think we've also accounted for, different absorption rates and the fact that, the housing would come online in the future while understanding that you're talking about market conditions today, right? So
Because historically,
how,
been selling real estate in Red Hook for 20 years, so I
okay.
don't think it's going to change anytime soon.
Hi, Victoria. This is Matt from the real estate team. I totally hear your concerns and sentiments regarding Red Hook. When we looked at the model, our consultants did rather, the predominant share of the mixed-use value generated from the housing sites really stems from the Columbia Street to BMT North. We were assuming, and you can see this in the materials that were put forward, the consultants assumed $100 per square foot for the market rate rental, and discounted that as you kind of went south to the site. So just wanted to flag that, there's a realization.
And for the sale, that's for rental.
For the sale, anywhere from 1,600 per square foot for the south, to north of 2,000 for BMT North in and around Columbia Street.
But there is places in 360 Furman Street that are selling at $1,000 a square foot right now for 1 bedrooms. So you already have properties that are in the Columbia Waterfront District that are not reaching those numbers.
We hear you. Yeah, I mean, there could be some aspiration to this pricing, but with a development like this, you envision a broader uplift of the entire region, entire neighborhood.
That's what they're doing in downtown Brooklyn and buildings. There's just an article this week in the New York Times about what it's like to live in a building with all empty units.
Yeah, I wouldn't comp this to downtown Brooklyn, but I hear your point. I take your point.
But how much different would it be to downtown Brooklyn? Because that was a totally neighborhood that was raised and then rebuilt up without a lot of contextual pieces to it that make a neighborhood a neighborhood.
Yeah. Look, I think this
Like
planning
Atlantic Yards.
or Atlantic. Oh, yeah, I hear you. I think with every planning process, there are learning moments, and the task force has certainly issue spotted. Suboptimal planning that's gone on for the last 2-3 decades. I think the plan that Matt Stout and team have put together tries to address some of that.
The problem I see though, Matt, is that what we're trying to do that we've gotten wrong for the last 20 or 30 years, we're trying to do it in 6 months. And to have a successful real estate planning site that's going to actually meet market demands, we need a lot more time than this. Real estate developers don't do it in this short amount of time. So why does the city think it can do it in this short amount of time? And for all of the rezonings and ULURP processes, nothing has ever been done in this short of a timeline. You're asking so much and you guys just don't have you're not prepared, you don't have the answers. We want to do this well. This is a multi-generational opportunity for us to fix the harms of Robert Moses and to give this neighborhood a lot of the infrastructure and address our climate change issues that we've been suffering from. We have power outages here all the time. Our toilets are backing up into our basements. Like there's a lot of things that be addressed here, and it needs to be done thoughtfully. And actually, this rush process isn't giving us enough space to make sure we don't make the same mistakes we've been making for the last 30 years.
Understand. We hear you. I think there's a tension out there, and there are folks, that maybe aren't heard in these forums that would like to see a faster delivery of public goods across the city, and would not welcome a 30-year delivery time frame, particularly as we think about open space and resiliency. That the needs are now. But we hear you. We totally hear you.
City of Yes also, though, that are going to be making housing all over the city and not just on one focus site. This could be a phased plan to understand what the market needs are over time, because you can't build this. You're not going to be building all this housing in, how long has it taken to build Atlantic Yards? You know, like it actually is going to take you a long time to execute on the housing. So why isn't there not a phased plan to make sure that you're creating housing and a site that meets market demands in both the maritime and the housing industry? And let's see what happens. We just passed City Vest. Why aren't we waiting to see a little bit what's going to come from that monumental decision that will really reshape the housing market here in New York City if it does what the experts say it's going to do, which is address our affordable housing needs and our housing needs.
Thank you, Victoria. I'll reiterate that we certainly hear you, and also reiterate, from what Mike Stamatis said and what we've offered before, is that one of the reasons why we do feel this very literal time crunch is because there are peers that are actively falling into the water, right? And so I just want to make sure
And the
that
funding is for that, not for the
it's
housing
in
network. That's the, but
just to sort of put a point on why there is, from our perspective, and as you have heard others say, there is an operational reality that we are up
and
against.
all the grants.
So
and
I
funding
do,
are tied to
Victoria,
the-
I do want to
they're
go
tied
to
the maritime. They're
Matthias.
tied to the port. None of the funding opportunities are tied. The grant money is tied to the maritime and the port. It is not tied to this housing problem. So we can address the housing problem, the port problems, while we make a phased plan for the housing piece. It doesn't all have to happen together. The port can be addressed by the grant money that we have.
Again, I hear you, but I'm gonna go to Matthias next.
Thank you. As a member of the Open Space, Transportation and Mobility Advisory Group, I wanted to go back to the UPS site and what I feel has not been reflected in the current scenarios as an opportunity to address both resiliency improvements and a reduction of the traffic burdens by the expansion of, by avoiding putting a significant amount of housing there. And I was wondering, in the short time ahead of a potential vote on mid-April, what would be the best opportunities to present an alternative scenario, let's call it a scenario 5, where the now real possibility of a UPS acquisition is leveraged to address some of the community concerns that have not been reflected on the scenario so far. So really honing in on the on a planning that's conscious of the traffic burdens that housing would allow specifically there, and leaning in on the opportunities for a neighborhood-wide, not only BMT, but Red Hook neighborhood-wide resiliency features. Again, acknowledging that the Fort Defiance proposal is mentioned on slide 59 of the presentation. I'd like to understand why or how a more thorough consideration for advanced resiliency features like what's proposed in it, how that's been considered and how it can be explored further ahead of deciding on which scenario is put forward.
Thanks, Matthias. I'm going to ask Matt Stout to start with this one, to talk about how resiliency has been included, not just at the UPS site, but if you could start there, Matt, and then
Well, I
talk
would
about the
say
whole site.
particularly on the UPS site because of its strategic location and the value that it offers as opposed to in other places or throughout. So I'm particularly interested in hearing about the considerations for there.
UPS.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah, so just specifically on the UPS site. So, and I'll have to talk a little bit about the overall region, the overall site, because resilience is all connected. We all know that water doesn't know any boundaries of a particular site. It will flow freely regardless of what site it is. And we know that that Red Hook is extremely low-lying everywhere. And with this plan, we have an amazing opportunity to elevate the site of BMT and to build a flood wall that would eventually become a part of a more integrated flood defense system that could protect the entire peninsula. And so specifically on the UPS site, and you'll see in some of the diagrams toward the end of the presentation, the idea is to elevate the site and to integrate a flood wall within the site itself and underneath an elevated public space along the waterfront.
Thanks, Matt. I see John, and then given the time, we will make this our last question. Go ahead, please, John.
Right. Exactly what Matthew said just now, just bring something else to mind. Like we keep saying ports, piers, our infrastructure. I don't know why we're asking to pay for it. Like, the state supposedly is only giving 15 million to this. That's peanuts. I don't understand that. It's supposed to be state property, right? That's the whole idea behind the GPP. So why are they not contributing more to this? Like when Kathy Hochul wanted her stadium, she got 850 million out of somewhere. When she wanted the city of Yes to pass, she found $1 billion. Right now, we're building the biggest jail in the world right there in Chinatown. And there's money for all these things, but for some reason, there's no money for these piers. And this is the only way. And I reject that totally. The community rejects that. There has to be other money because this is not, we're asking to pay for something that the whole region pretty much is going to benefit from. How is that? Where does that make sense? Like it just can't. And then what I want you to see, it's especially here in the Columbia Street waterfront, but the whole Red Hook, right? We have to live with a mistake that happened 70 years ago that Robert Moses made, right? An unelected person that was never elected to any public office made all these things happen and all of that. And we're living with those mistakes to this day. And we're trying to figure out how to fix it. And that's what we don't want to happen here now this time. We don't want our grandkids to have to deal with the mistakes that were made now. And we're being rushed through something that I don't see where the rush is anymore. I don't see it because if it was to get that money, I don't think it's coming. I don't know who thinks that money's still coming given the situation. So I don't know what is this big rush. Is it because this administration wants to put their people in before they leave? I don't know what it is, but somebody needs to explain it because it just doesn't make sense that we're being asked to go through all of this. Like you see how this whole meeting, we were supposed to talk amongst each other and even get to that. You see the anger, you see the frustration, you see the anxiety in this community, and you just want to keep going along with it. And then your community engagement. Look at this. Look at this. Look what you're dealing with right here. There is none. Like this has been a horrible process from day one. And let's just do this right. That's all we're asking. Please, let's just do this right. Because we live here. You guys plan it out or whatever, and it's just a map to you. We live here. We have to deal with this. And I mean, please, just involve us more. Listen to us. There's experts here. There's experts here because we've lived it. There's experience here. Please just listen to us and let's do this right. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate your feedback. I appreciate everyone participating tonight. I do understand that, the challenges that we are trying to solve here are difficult, and it requires, robust engagement, robust conversation. And so I apologize that we did not get to the breakout rooms, but I can say on behalf of the project team, we appreciate the feedback and the questions and the statements that were made this evening. Just at the start, I will say, John, that while I can't speak on behalf of the state in terms of what their commitment is to the project, obviously we're working on behalf of EDC and the city. I will say that we are working very hard to keep that $164 million that we secured from the federal government. We are working to secure an additional $109 million from the city as the matching funds. And we have already committed 55 million and 15 million for the electric crane. So if there's anything to sort of leave with before we close, it's that, you know, the EDC team, the project team that's represented here is very invested in this work. It's why we're here having even difficult conversations, because we agree with you that we want to see a successful outcome. And so, you know, I appreciate you all taking the time from your evening to, you know, continue to engage with us on this. As I mentioned in the chat, we have taken all of the questions that came in the chat, as well as notes as what was asked. We will prepare a response document that we will send out. And lastly, I will flag that we have our public workshop on Monday evening. I believe that we have shared that material out with all of you, but happy to re-up it if anyone hasn't received it. So with that, Chris, is there anything else that I forgot to flag?
No, just one last piece. There was a form that we have for folks who didn't get a chance to speak or wanted to share any additional feedback. So I don't know if the team wants to bring that slide up. Just one other opportunity to share direct feedback.
Perhaps we can drop it into the chat and then send it out.
As a follow-up, yeah. Yeah, no, I just would say thanks everyone for taking the time. We really appreciate you sharing, and looking forward to following up.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks all.